Well, happy Tuesday, Lighthouse. Are you ready to dig into the Proverbs with me again? We're in chapter 2 of the Proverbs, and we'll start in verse 16. But remember that chapter 2 has been largely about the benefits of wisdom. If you'll seek wisdom like silver, if you'll search for it like buried treasure, it will guard you from evil people. It'll guide you. Wisdom will be, you'll notice, what is a shield to you in difficult times. And then in verse 16, the argument, it doesn't take a turn, but it expands to where there's more going on here than even we thought at the beginning. And so this is what it says. And then we'll make a couple of comments before we dig in. But let's just read it together. So verse 16 of chapter 2. So you will be delivered, again, the benefit of seeking wisdom, of leaning into God, of searching for wisdom like buried treasure. You will be delivered from the forbidden woman. Could be also foreigner. So this forbidden woman is the language also might mean this foreign woman, which I think is, if we think about Solomon's situation and we think about, some of the things we'll talk about here in a second, I think foreign is a pretty good way to look at this. So I'll start over and not interrupt myself anymore. So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house sinks down to death and her paths to the departed. None who go to her come back, nor do they regain the paths of life. Man, before we dig into who this woman is and how we're supposed to understand this, I think we have to remind ourselves of what exactly the covenant was between God and his people. And I think we need to remember that because we have to remember how serious and how profound the covenant is between God's people now, between us and God. You know, in the Old Testament, the difference was the covenant was with a nation, a family, people who were biologically related to Israel. And so the plan was with this people, this nation, God, Yahweh was going to be their God. They were going to be his people, and there was going to be this special bond that is always used in covenantal language. And sometimes the covenantal language sounds like a land deal. It's like there's the stronger, and then there's the vassal, and they make a deal for the land. And then other times, though, this covenant between God and the people sounds a lot like a marriage covenant. And in fact, a lot of people will tell you that what's going on at Sinai as Moses is coming down that mountain, as the law is being presented, this I don't think is all that's going on, but a lot of people will say there's a lot of like wedding, marriage, covenant kind of language there. So what is happening is God is taking Israel as a wife. So there's this, there are vows, there's conditions, like in any marriage, there's vows between them. I will be your God, you will be my people. Here's the law, here's how to be in right relationship with me. So when when Solomon goes to write this book of wisdom, and he says, man, if you will seek for wisdom, you remember there's been this picture of wisdom personified as a woman who is calling out and saying in the middle of the din of the marketplace. And now he says, yeah, but there's another voice in the world. It's really interesting to me that here, just a chapter and a half in, even though this is not a narrative, this is not a story that's being told, still, this is an argument that Solomon is building on top of each other. It's not exactly a narrative, but he is building a case here. And so he's kind of said, look, this is the way the world's going to be. There's going to be a din of information. There's going to be lots of voices coming at you in society. And we would say, yeah, I hear that. Just it's very cluttered. I'm on the internet. I'm on my phone. The TV's coming at me. Everybody I talk to has got an opinion. There's lots of stuff coming at me. And then he says, in the middle of all of that, there's going to be this woman wisdom. You know, I probably always think her name's Sophia, right? And so this woman of wisdom, that if we will drown out the din and focus on that beautiful voice, like hearing your mom's voice in a crowd, like hearing the voice of your dad in a busy place, if we'll zero in on that wisdom, on that instruction, that'll be, and we search for that, that's what's going to be to protect us and guide us. But now there's this darker character that enters the picture. Not only is there this din of just the noise of the world, and not only is there the voice of wisdom, but it's like Solomon says, look, there's going to be another voice too. And he personifies this other voice as a woman as well. If you have the woman of wisdom who is calling us, who is encouraging us, who wants us to live wisely, then there's also going to be this other voice. And he personifies this other voice as a female voice too. And he says, you will be delivered from the forbidden woman or the foreign woman. You know, when I think about just Solomon's life, it was very much like foreign women that caused his downfall and him marrying all these foreign brides. But it wasn't the girls. It was the idols that came with them. You know, it would be pretty easy to like simplify this passage and say, oh, this is about not being drawn away to an illicit romantic affair or whatever. And that's fine. There's application there, but that's not what's going on here. Solomon is saying, look, guys, you have a covenant with God. We are, in a profound sense, married to God. The New Testament uses language, we're the bride of Christ. And being drawn away to the way the world thinks, being drawn away to wisdom that is not godly wisdom, but is actually worldly wisdom. This is not just a matter of following your heart. This is adultery. In fact, the New Testament will pick up on that theme. You remember James says, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity towards God? He calls the people he's writing to you adulterous people because they have been friends with the world instead of following God. So a lot of times we can just think that our decisions don't really matter. And Solomon's here to say, look, there's the din of all the noise of the world, and that's going to get in your way. You need the skill of filtering through all of the noise. You also need the skill of honing in on wisdom, on listening to God. But there's another skill. You need the skill of being able to listen to the voice that's pulling you away. We have a very real enemy. We have someone that wants to destroy life, that wants to destroy joy, who is constantly calling us as well. You will be delivered from the forbidden woman. This is idolatry. This is worshiping things that aren't God. This is leaning on things that aren't God. Who forsakes the companion of her youth. Do you see that? Who forsakes like the husband of her youth. This is a picture of maybe even Israel walking away from God and instead going after idols, going after foreign gods. And her house, let me go back, and it says, so you'll be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. Isn't that the truth? Now, it might not be, again, let's get out of our head that this is only about like sexual temptation. But man, we have an enemy that would love us to worship anything but God, who speaks in such smooth words. Temptation is real. We've all heard it. It's funny too. I think there's part of this that feels natural. Like in me, let's call it common sense and immaturity. There's a part of me that even apart from God, I have some common sense. I am able to learn things and I can keep myself out of trouble. You know, I wouldn't run in traffic or, run with scissors or whatever. And then there's another part of me that's immature, that totally wants to run into traffic and run with scissors or whatever, right? And so there's this battle just inside me. We might call that, just even common sense and original sin or immaturity or whatever, however you want to make that sound. But Solomon is saying, no, there's more than just what's going on inside you. There's actually, wisdom is external from you, and you need to learn to listen to it. But man, it is foolish to not acknowledge that also temptation is external from you. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't need to be tempted to sin. I came fully equipped to be a dirty, rotten scoundrel. But I'm not alone in that. I do have an enemy that wants to tempt me away from God, away from godly wisdom, from that godly voice that is keeping me safe as I walk that path. Who forsakes the companions of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. Like, this is the voice we're staying away from. That which would forget the covenant with God. Man, do we know how firmly rooted our relationship with God is? Man, we're not on the market. We're not up for grabs. We are married to Christ. And to follow any voice that would lure us away from faithful obedience to Christ. I mean, the blood of the covenant is Christ's own blood. He has bought us. He has paid the price. So Solomon says, look, here's the full picture. There's the den of the world, stuff coming at you. Then in the middle of that den, God is calling you. Like, wisdom is calling out. And you're going to have to learn to hone in on that. But that's not the only loud voice. It's not just the den of the world. There's also this voice of temptation, this voice of folly, this voice of foolishness. And over the Proverbs, Solomon will develop this idea of foolishness, and other proverbial writers as well will develop this idea of foolishness. But just let me warn you with the last verse in this short passage. For her house sinks down to death, like that's the way it goes. Temptation has smooth words. I don't care if it's the temptation to greed or to gluttony or to laziness or to lying or what the temptation is. But man, the words are smooth at the beginning, but they lead to destruction. For her house sinks down to death, and her paths to the departed. And listen to this: none who go her way come back, nor do they regain the paths of life. Now remember, these are proverbs, not promises. This is not a once and for all. Anybody who follows temptation or walks away into idolatry can never return to Jesus. That's just not what's happening here. It's just Solomon saying, look, once you start down the path of walking away from God and listening to the voice of folly instead of the voice of wisdom, once you start looking for the best life in other things, man, just not very many people come back from that. In the same way that maybe you would say somebody who starts cheating on their spouse, it's very rarely do they come back from that. Man, our covenant with God is precious. We are being tempted away to follow all kinds of other idols. We need the skill to not just filter out the stuff that the world has to say, but we need the skill to firmly reject that voice of foolishness, that voice of folly, who would draw us away from God, and instead cling fast to the only God who created us, sustains us, loves us, provides for us, and cares for us. Have a good day, guys.